So good morning. I will start in English because our very first presenter actually will be our guest from OECD. He is Ben Game. His name is Ben Game. I can see he is connected already to our room on Zoom. Very short introduction maybe. For the Ben, his education, or he is in educational background, I would say, is in economics and international relations. He has experience working in private companies, with private companies and businesses. One of them is Deloitte Access Economics in Australia. Very well-known company. He has been with the company for 5 years. And at the moment, Ben Game is a policy analyst in the National Skills Strategy team of the OECD Center for Skills. And today he is going to present and speak about a strategic approach to developing and using youth skills. Ben, can you hear me? Can you switch on your camera?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so you will be on a full screen soon, and I will try to take the questions for you. You have about 25 minutes for presentation, and we will look for the questions if we have some.
So today I wanted to present on a connected approach to developing and using youth skills, speaking from the experience of the OECD Skills Strategy Project. So the purpose of my presentation is to share the OECD's conceptual framework and process for helping countries to improve people's skills, with a particular focus on youth, effective connections between the different actors involved in youth skills policy, and with a bit of focus on Lithuania as well, because we are currently in the midst of a skills strategy project with Lithuania. And in fact, that's how I got invited to this conference today. So a few disclaimers. This will be a presentation from the perspective of practitioners rather than, say, researchers or academics. Our project is not all about youth, but youth come up in every project. And in the case of Lithuania, there will be one chapter focusing specifically on young people's skills. And as I said before, the sort of case example for today will be Lithuania's skills strategy project, and that's in progress. So with those caveats in mind, I will go through the OECD skills strategy framework and approach, talk about the importance of getting youth skills right from our perspective, provide some high-level, internationally comparative analysis of youth skills development across the OECD and the use of youth skills across the OECD, with a bit of a focus on Lithuania again, but also some discussion about how youth skills policies might be governed in a connected way that leads to better policies and better outcomes, followed by some Q&A. So this presentation is perhaps more focused on the process that we undertake in this project, which is a process that focuses very much on making connections between the different actors and stakeholders involved in youth skills. You will get a little bit of content and analysis along the way as well. So what is the OECD approach here? How do we take a connected approach through the skills strategy project? Well, the strategy builds on a framework composed of 3 dimensions: developing relevant skills across the life course, which underscores the importance of not only developing strong proficiency in a broad set of skills, but developing skills that are most in demand in the labour market and society, either today or anticipated to be in strong demand. The emphasis is development of skills across the life course, which starts in early childhood and continues into adulthood. But of course, what happens in those younger years is crucial to later outcomes. And we don't just care about what happens in schools and formal institutions, but in workplaces, homes, and communities. But developing a strong and broad set of skills is just the first step. So to ensure that countries and people gain the full value from these investments, people and youth in particular need the opportunities and incentives to use their skills effectively in work and society. So that's pillar 2. And the third pillar is about strengthening governance of the skills system. And this is about promoting coordination and cooperation across the whole of government, engaging stakeholders, non-government stakeholders, to benefit from their insights, to build support for policy reforms. It also involves building integrated information systems to support informed choices, not just by those making policies for youth, but also the youth themselves, and aligning and coordinating financing arrangements to ensure adequate and efficient financing and well-targeted financing too. So our team has applied this framework in 17 diverse countries, some of the more recent ones being Latvia, Poland, Northern Ireland, and Lithuania. The major contributions that this project makes is it helps countries to map their skills system, and in particular to see who is involved in something like youth skills policies, whether that be from schools or non-formal education and training, or public employment services efforts with youth, or other agencies involved in, say, youth volunteering, etc. So we seek to map the different stakeholders and actors involved as a sort of first step to building those connections. We focus on identifying good practices in the country and internationally. We seek to, with the country and with the people involved in the project from the country's side, identify priorities and make detailed policy recommendations, but also raise awareness about what the main challenges appear to be, including in youth skills. Is it something that is starting in early childhood education and care in that part of the system? Are things reasonably good up till, let's say, upper secondary, and then start to fall apart a bit as students attract, as equity seems to play, or disadvantage seems to play a bigger role in student performance, etc. So we're seeking to raise awareness along the way of what are the most important issues. And that's awareness amongst different ministries, amongst stakeholders, but also at the political level as well. So we employ a whole of government approach, let's say, and we ask the countries we work with to do the same. So that's probably the first area where we really build connections for our analysis and our recommendations, including on youth skills. So on the OECD side, we are drawing on the expertise of various parts of the OECD. Our centre is the OECD Centre for Skills. We draw on the Directorate for Education and Skills, Directorate for Employment, when looking at skills use, and many others. And on the country side, we've been able to get several ministries involved in our projects. And in the case of Lithuania, you can see the various government agencies and ministries involved, overseen by the Government Strategic Analysis Centre, Strata, various ministries, but also we've got representatives of trade unions and employer associations on, let's say, the national project team or the steering committee for this project. So we think getting people to the table at the start of these projects is essential if we're going to make serious inroads into improving youth skills policies. We make an effort to bring non-government stakeholders to the table. So we run large workshops in countries, and you see some photo evidence here from some of the different countries we've worked in. And, you know, it could be up to 150 people in a room representing all sectors with a stake in skills, with a stake in youth skills, who are sitting around tables and having the discussions themselves and building those connections with each other. We sort of facilitate, we moderate, and then we get out of the way and let them have those discussions. And we ask them to do work. We ask them to produce some assessment for us, to brainstorm some recommendations for improvement. And that is ultimately reflected in our work and in our reports. And as you can see here in the bottom right corner, the nature of those consultations has changed this year. So with Lithuania, it's all been Zoom-based, but we're still getting very large turnouts to our consultations, and they've proved to be very fruitful, notwithstanding the constraints we're under in a virtual format. So we will then focus on priority areas, and this is the caveat that I mentioned before, that it's not all about youth skills in our case. In the case of Lithuania, we decided to focus on equipping young people with skills for work and life, and that takes a broad definition of skills, which I'll get into later, and it considers different contexts for learning outside of formal institutions. And it looks at specific groups, perhaps, who need more targeted interventions, whether they be in rural areas or from areas of disadvantage. But we also look at the other parts of the system where we're taking a systemic approach. So then we look at adult learning. As youth enter the labour market and get some work experience under their belts, what sort of opportunities do they have for ongoing continuous professional education and training? Or for youth whose transitions to the labour market were bumpy or perhaps not so successful, what sort of learning opportunities are available in the adult learning system of relevance to them? And we also look at using people's skills more effectively in workplaces. So that's not just about activating people's skills in the labour market, but ensuring that workplaces are making best use of employees' skills, for example, through high performance work practices, whether it be autonomy or teleworking or performance-based pay, other practices that are known to be positively correlated with productivity and efficiency in individual workplaces. And as I said, we will always look at the governance of how these things fit together, the roles and responsibilities of the different actors and coordination between them. So our projects will ultimately end in a report, a written report with assessment in each of these areas with detailed recommendations. But I think for the purpose of today, the more interesting thing is the journey that we undertake with countries to raise awareness, to build buy-in, and ensure that the assessment and the recommendations are sufficiently tailored to the nuances and the situation of the country. And we think that journey is vital to the success of our projects and vital to the policy improvements that we are seeking, including for youth skills. So step one for us is very much about convincing government and non-government actors of the importance of getting youth skills right. So we've made a point of this in all our projects, including in the Lithuania project. Why are youth skills so important for countries? First, we think it's important that to clarify that skills mean different things to different people, and what we're thinking of is a broad range of cognitive, metacognitive skills, technical skills and professional skills required to perform specific tasks, but also socio and emotional skills like perseverance, self-regulation, self-organization, and empathy, etc. We know from the OECD survey of adult skills, PIAC, that skill levels, particularly here literacy proficiency, are positively associated with a range of social and economic outcomes. You see the OECD average associations in white, and you see Lithuania's in blue. So this is the difference in those outcomes between the share of adults with high and low literacy proficiency. So positive associations with political efficacy, the extent to which people feel like they are active participants in the political process as opposed to spectators. We see positive associations with health, volunteering, trust, and employment. At the country level, skills also matter for economic prosperity. So we try to make the case that investment in youth skills, and in particularly for youth perhaps who are falling behind, disadvantaged groups, pays off in the long run for society, for the economy as a whole. So here you see the associations between labour productivity and the use of reading skills at work, again from the PIAC survey of adult skills. And of course, megatrends are changing and increasing the skills needed for success in work and life. Globalization is creating a more integrated world characterized by the expansion of global value chains. And indeed, the skills that increasingly young people have determine to a great extent where countries are able to position themselves along these value chains. Technological change is reshaping how we work and live. It is transforming the skill requirements of jobs. And it's even changing how, when, and where we learn. I think the COVID crisis has shown that more than anything. And demographic change, immigration, aging, shrinking the working age population, which means that there's increasing pressure to utilize existing labour as much as possible and to make sure that the youth entering the labour market are as skilled as possible and have good opportunities to build those skills over time. Many jobs are at risk of being automated in the future. So this is the case for getting youth skills right, ensuring that their decisions of what to study and the provision of institutions is informed by the trends that we see in the labour market. So this chart shows that about 21% of workers in Lithuania face a high risk of seeing their jobs automated, and another 42% face significant changes in their job tasks due to automation. So this means that many people will need to develop new skills for new jobs or upgrade their skills for existing jobs. But the first thing is to ensure that youth are getting appropriate skills in the first place from our education systems. So one of the pillars that's the case for why we think a strategic approach to skills is so important because of these megatrends. And then we turn to our pillars of analysis, the first one being developing youth skills. So in Lithuania's case, the country continues to expand young people's enrolment at all levels of formal education and training. It has made significant investments into non-formal learning. Yet young people's skills could be improved further. First of all, Lithuania could do a better job at equipping young people with cognitive skills as the foundation for lifelong learning. So you see the chart here shows quite a lot of variation in the performance of 15-year-old students in reading from the latest PISA assessment conducted by the OECD. You have here both the long-term trends, and it's not clear that countries are necessarily improving over time, and indeed several are not improving over time. In Lithuania's case, relatively low performance of 15-year-old students, which is basically stable over time, so we want to change that. And of course, underneath all of this, you have disparities in student skills between rural areas, urban areas, and disparities that start in childhood. So Lithuania's youth also lack strong social skills like collaborative problem solving. In Lithuania, again, you have relatively low levels of measured problem solving skills in PISA. So this is what we believe is increasingly important in the context of these megatrends is strong socio and emotional skills. So again, we want to ask who needs to be involved inside the formal education institutions and outside of them to strengthen the socio-emotional skills of young people. And in Lithuania's case, one of the strategies being employed is through non-formal education and seeking to make that more relevant. The skill levels of recent graduates are not consistently high, so we look at employment, the numeracy proficiency of 25 to 34-year-olds. And so you see, for example, vet graduates have slightly lower numeracy proficiency than their counterparts in other countries. Tertiary graduates have slightly higher proficiency than their counterparts in other countries, but this could be improved further. And now on to using youth skills. So how well are youth skills being used? So just some quick data here from the project. We looked at graduates' employment outcomes are good, but could be strengthened further. So you see the employment outcomes of recent vet graduates are catching up to the EU average at around 80%. Tertiary graduates' employment outcomes remain quite high, above the EU average, around 90%. However, many graduates end up mismatched to their jobs. So about 25% of tertiary graduates in Lithuania report being overqualified for their jobs. And in fact, some end up in low-skilled jobs. So from Strata's analysis, we know that 1 in 5 university graduates with a bachelor degree and 1 in 3 college graduates with a professional bachelor degree end up in low-skilled jobs. And of course, the coronavirus pandemic is only lowering job prospects for Lithuania's most recent graduates. So this highlights the importance of a responsive education system for Lithuania. Here is the youth unemployment rate from the global financial crisis of 2008 through to our latest data, which is about August of this year. You see Lithuania in the yellow. So there's been a huge spike in youth unemployment, particularly in Lithuania compared to the OECD and the EU 27 average. So the impetus for getting youth skills right is simply amplified by the current crisis that we are in. We cannot afford to repeat the, let's say, major failure of youth policies and youth unemployment that was experienced during the global financial crisis. We need to make sure that this time we get it right and that all necessary policy supports for individual young people, for education and training institutions, and for employers are in place. And I think employers are particularly critical here. They're the ones who are giving young people their first experience in the labor market. They're the ones who are offering apprenticeships, internships, and work-based training, which are critical for successful transitions to the labor market for young people. And so I think one of the things that the OECD is now focusing on is what supports can be given to those firms who are training or hiring young people in what is a very difficult business environment. So that's perhaps a key area of public policy focus that is needed now. So finally, onto governing youth policies. I've talked about a lot of this. This is the sort of underlying philosophy of the project. You see, we try to bring different parts of government to the table to discuss these challenges. We try to bring diverse stakeholders to the table. And we try to look at these important systemic issues. So in Lithuania's case, we're considering the need for interministerial bodies with responsibility for skills policy to ensure that coordination is systemic. We're considering the capacity of subnational actors to fulfill their responsibility for youth skills in particular, whether that be municipalities or others. How can capacity be built to ensure the policy outcomes we're seeking? And indeed, ensuring the timely supply of information to those involved in the policymaking process. We're also looking at optimizing information systems for policymakers and individuals in Lithuania. So increasingly, policymakers, public employment services, and young people need good information on how skills needs are evolving in the context of the current recession, the current slowdown. We've seen evidence from several countries for which real-time data are available on job postings that it's not all bad news. Yes, we've seen slumps in job postings for many of these sectors that you would expect, but we're also seeing increases in some sectors, the obvious ones being many occupations related to the medical sector, also packaging and transport, think Amazon, etc. But also some unexpected countries, occupations, which will differ substantially between countries. There's not necessarily clear trends, but for the data that we've seen on real-time job postings, there are definitely opportunities here for young people which need to be well understood by them and public employment services and others who are assisting them. But also well-targeted, sustainable, and shared financing is very important. So the question here is, how can we fund the sort of supports that youth and those employing them and those educating them need? Where will the money come from? So we're talking about potential tripartite funding agreements, better use of ESF resources, and more systemic funding from national sources. So in summary, here are just a few potential strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of our approach, in my opinion. I won't speak through them. Perhaps you've already created some of your own conclusions, but I would be happy to talk through these or anything else in the Q&A. So thank you very much. I'll stop there. I can see a message on the chat, so perhaps I just respond quickly to that one. Yeah, so a question from Liu Tauras. So about the main challenges for skills for life in the near future. How do you define those in more concrete terms? Surveillance, robotization, spreading ideas of cyber body augmentations. Well, that's highly technical and futuristic. But to start with the main challenges for the near future, I think the near-term challenge is what's been presented by the COVID crisis. So there is a need for, given the skill sets that recent graduates have, a need for policymakers and employment services to perhaps up their game and rethink the services that they can offer to young people in this moment of crisis. So part of that is outreach to young people who perhaps, we know that a lot of learners, particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds, were particularly unmotivated or demotivated by the experience of school shutdowns and separation from teachers and classmates, etc. So identifying and reaching out to those students in new ways probably means an expansion in a lot of existing youth policies and programs, including from public employment services. In terms of the skills needed, I mean, there are no concrete answers here, I don't think. So what the OECD focuses on is having the best possible skills assessment and anticipation systems in place to monitor the evolution in the labour market, short-term evolution and anticipated long-term evolution. And a good system has several characteristics, and we think that involves the involvement of all stakeholders and several ministries, and both quantitative and qualitative approaches. But we're very much focusing, I think, on how do we ensure that initial education and training develops learners, develops a learning attitude and people who can learn and adapt over life. I think we've moved past the idea of initial education preparing people for the rest of their life. So to deal with the uncertainties around surveillance, robotization, body augmentations, and all these things that perhaps we don't properly understand yet, we need a good focus on transversal skills right up until higher education, including interdisciplinary skills, but also accessible, high quality adult learning opportunities for youth in the future.
Have we got questions from the hall? I can't see the hands. I will use my opportunity. Actually, my question is more philosophical, probably, but it's it is connected with the very first question, because thinking about the fastness of the developments in the technologies, is it not too fast, because now we are starting to talk that young people should learn how to live and use technologies rather than technology serving the people. So my question is technology serving us, or we are going to serve technology in the future? Because, humans are social beings, social animals. So what is happening with our social nature when we are living more and more with technology, not with human?
Well, yeah, this is a good question and an important question. So I think in summary, technology is a good servant and a bad master. And so one of the social skills, let's say, or socio-emotional skills that you might consider in the initial education system is how students can be masters of the technology rather than being mastered by it. And I think a trend in a lot of countries we work with is, exposing young people, even from early childhood, to some cutting edge learning technologies in particular. I think like any of these mega trends, this one being technology and digitalization, our philosophy is that we want to skill people appropriately in a broad sense. We want to skill young people in a broad sense such that they can influence these trends rather than just be passive participants or victims of these trends. So that would be our philosophical approach to these things.
Thank you, Ben. Just my short comment. I'm using using my status at this moment, but I think it's important that to think that employment is not only for earning the money. Employment is also very important for our well-being, psychological and emotional well-being, because it means that we are busy with something during the day. And And if you know, robots and the technologies does everything instead of us, it means that we have nothing to do, you know, and all the problems raises then in our heads, then we have nothing to do. But it's again, you know, probably we will have to solve this issue in the future. How to keep ourselves busy.
I think well-being is the right word to be using at this time, because from the OECD surveys of youth during the COVID crisis, this came up as the issue, the well-being of young people. It's not just about, can we get them back into schools? Can we help them complete? Can we help them transition to the labor market? There's a need for a broad understanding of protecting young people's well-being through these difficult times.